I thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm coming tonight to talk about one of the issues that is of extreme significance. In fact, in every town hall meeting I've ever held, one of the first questions, if not the first question is asked, is about illegal entry into this country and specifically border security. So, in talking about what the issue is before us, this is a map of the United States that is divided into the Border Patrol sectors, the areas in which the Border Patrol has, and as you will see if you can from the numbers, there is a vast difference in the number of people who are coming illegally into this country based on the sector. If you go to the state of Maine, that sector, the last time we have verifiable figures, the last time we had a complete figures from the Border Patrol and the Department of Homeland Security, only 56 illegals were apprehended trying to get into Maine, which has to tell you that there's not a whole lot of people from Nova Scotia trying to come over here and taking hockey jobs. In fact, I have to think they probably looked at them as tourists. But if you look down here in the area in blue, the Tucson, Arizona sector, which is only part of Arizona, it's not the entire state of Arizona, 51%, 250,000 people, the last 2 years for which we have complete data, 250,000 people came through Arizona. In fact, 51% of all of the people who illegally came into the United States and were apprehended came through the Tucson, Arizona sector and were apprehended in the Tucson, Arizona sector, which has to bring about the simple question of why. Why is Arizona, this part of Arizona, the obvious entrance of choice of those trying to get into this country illegally? And I really think the answer lies in the next chart. This is the borderland along our southern border. The black line is 100 miles from the border, which is, by definition, both by statute and judicial decision, the legal jurisdiction of our Border Patrol. The area in red is the area that is owned by the federal government in those areas. You'll see that that specific area of Arizona, almost 80% of that is owned by the federal government. That's over almost 21 million acres of land owned by the federal government, in sharp contrast to like the Texas border and especially the northern border. Of that 21 million acres, roughly 21 million acres, an area the size of the state of Connecticut and Delaware combined is wilderness area. And that doesn't include also areas that are endangered species habitat. Those areas that are red are where we find the federal government prohibiting the Border Patrol from doing its job. The Border Patrol actually has access in the white areas, private property, to do their job. It is only when the federal government stops the federal Border Patrol from doing their job on federal property that we seem to have a problem. And unfortunately, those coming into the country seem to realize that this area where the federal government stops the federal Border Patrol on federal land, as unusual and as bizarre as that seems, becomes the entrance of choice for them coming into this country. And I'm not just talking about immigrants, people coming over here to try and find jobs in some particular way. This is the entrance of choice of the drug cartels. Border Patrol will tell you privately their best estimate, only an estimate, is that 40% of those coming into this area of Arizona, in fact in the country, are part of the drug cartel. They don't care if the economy is going up and down. They don't care if there's E-Verify or not. They are still trying to come into this country. They will tell you roughly 80% of the illegal drugs coming into this country are still coming by the drug cartel in this area. And what is worse, it is not just the drug cartel. This is also the kind of human degradation that is taking place. There's a Seattle Times story that ran in 2009, and the title was, "Pair Accused of Smuggling and Enslaving Illegal Mexican Immigrants." The story was about the human trafficking we have that is a very serious problem, and the kind of violent acts that are used against women and children on this federal property. Seattle Times went on to illustrate the kinds of violent acts against humanity that are happening right here on American soil, the kinds of numerous accounts of rape and other violent acts that are taking place against women and children here. The counties, and I have been down there on the border and have seen evidence of this, have ample evidence, if you go along these trafficking routes, of rape trees, in which the drug cartel members, sometimes other illegal immigrants, will rape females and then force the victim to leave an article of clothing, usually an undergarment, on the trees and make this as if it is a type of monument to the horrible activity that is taking place on government land. And yet still, we do not give the Border Patrol access on government land that they have on private property. We are a sovereign country, and by definition, a sovereign country controls its borders. And that should be what we are doing. But unfortunately, we are not doing that at all. This is what the border down there in Arizona will look like from the air. You see, going along here is a fence. The fence doesn't go all the way up the mountainside. There are some areas in which fencing does not make sense and cannot be done. And there is one road that goes along the fence. That is the access that our Border Patrol has in this particular area. And in some cases, that becomes the sole access. If you talk to the Border Patrol agents by themselves, when they will be honest with you, they will clearly tell you they don't need more money to fight this problem on the border. They don't necessarily need more personnel. What they need is access. East-west access so they can go somewhere other than along the one road that follows the borderline and the border fence. That is what becomes extremely significant. And what is so bizarre? What is so bizarre in that is that the Border Patrol must obtain permission or a permit from federal land management agencies before its agents can maintain roads or install surveillance equipment on the lands or do what we ask them to do. And that, frankly, is simply wrong and, once again, ludicrous. Now, you see, it's one of those odd things that we stop the Border Patrol from doing their job, and instead we find that environmental degradation is taking place, but not by the Border Patrol, not by any other American citizens, but by those who are illegally coming across. This simply is one of the pictures of the kinds of trash that is left behind on private property and on public property, tons of which must be picked up, resulting from the fact that we do not have a Border Patrol that does have ability to patrol these particular areas. That's what's left behind. I hate to say this, but the drug cartel who is coming over doesn't care about wilderness designation. They don't care about endangered species habitat. They don't care about the endangered species unless it can be eaten. What they do is simply leave behind all of the trash as they're coming through. There is something wrong with that. This is another picture of what takes place there on the border. The cactus, this time the cacti along the border, is an endangered species that has been cut down by the drug cartels. If any other American did that, that becomes a felony. For them, all this is a nice roadblock along one of the few roads that is there, so when somebody else comes down there in a vehicle and stops, they are a perfect target for mugging and robbery and anything they want to. You'll find some of the cacti that's down there has graffiti on it, which shows certain areas where the cartel is in operations. Last couple of years, there have been some major fires down there along the southern border. The last large fire that went through Arizona and spilled over into New Mexico was a fire that started in two parts. The part up in northern Arizona probably was started by a camper. But in southern Arizona, that wasn't it. Forest Service has yet to determine who started that fire that spilled over into New Mexico and cost hundreds of millions of dollars of damage. But they have ruled out everyone except, well, illegal aliens that happen to be close to the known smuggling trails where the fire actually started. You see, what happens down there is there are three types of fires that are started. Two of them on purpose. One is a distress fire, in which case if somebody coming across the border is in a dire situation, lost their ability to go any further and they need rescuing, you start a fire because then obviously the firefighters will come and you'll get rescued. There is also diversion fires started specifically. A diversion fire is to make sure that when the fire starts over here and everyone runs over there to stop the fire, it means over here is now open for your diversion into this country. The drug cartels have this down to a habit and a style all of their own. The third part is simply an accidental fire. I think the assumption is that the last fires that were done down there were probably accidental fires, started indeed by those coming across the border illegally, but definitely not for diversion, and not for a distraction, just it was a problem that caused us enormous amount of loss of public wealth and public time in trying to fix that particular problem. The Department of Interior simply claims that the 1964 Wilderness Act takes precedence over everything else that is taking place on this property. They say that their duties are to fulfill this particular act, not necessarily to control the border. In fact, one of the letters they sent reads very carefully. The issue of emergency vehicle access by the U.S. Customs and Border Protection on the San Bernardino wilderness area, actually it doesn't say that, it says, issues remain and we seek the Border Patrol's assistance in resolving them as quickly as possible in order to prevent the significance and perhaps irreparable environmental damage we believe is imminent. Specifically, we are concerned with operating vehicles anywhere other than the roads, road dragging, and other activities that could cause erosion and mobilize fragile hydraulic soil characteristics of the San Bernardino area. What that says in simple terms is it doesn't really matter what the Border Patrol does. You don't want them to disturb the soil, even if it means being able to apprehend somebody illegal, especially the drug cartels coming over there. They would rather have the soil not bothered than actually find somebody who was entering this country illegally, especially part of the drug cartel. This is where I started. This is a response, once again, from the Department of Interior to the Border Patrol on this area. The issue of emergency vehicle access by the U.S. Customs and Border Protection on the San Bernardino Wildlife Refuge has been in dispute over the past few months. The recent exchange of letters from our respective offices failed to clearly identify the needs of our two agencies and reach agreement on how to best proceed. Now, once again, from my point of view, the way to best proceed is to stop the drug cartels from smuggling illegal drugs over here, not necessarily what took place. In fact, what they decided then was, what it says is, the federal land managers believe it is their duty to enforce restrictive laws associated with the Wilderness Act, even if it helps the drug cartel in their drug trafficking and the human smuggling and other criminal activities that are occurring as they cross into the United States. The chief also went on to say emergency circumstances exist. That's nice of them. When human life, health, and safety of persons within this area must be immediately addressed. Access to the refuge by the Border Patrol will be limited to the use of established administrative roads. However, you may access on foot to patrol or apprehend suspects. Managers of the land are dictating to the Border Patrol how they will do their job. I might add that this definition of what considers the chance of a Border Patrol actually going in and doing something rapidly is not what the memo of understanding between the Department of Interior and the Department of Homeland Security actually said. They came up with their own definition to stop the Border Patrol from doing it. Now, under this recommendation, the Border Patrol has to drive around this refuge, which adds hours to get to the other side, which obviously, if you're trying to capture somebody, something that just doesn't work. So, since that's what's taking place, how does the Department of Interior decide to solve the problem? It's easy. They put up gates. That was the result of that exchange on how to solve the problem of controlling our southern border. What the Department of Interior simply did is they put up a gate with a lock on it on the San Bernardino National Wildlife Refuge. It's amazing that they thought this solves the problem, because what this gate does is block out the Border Patrol from going in this area. It doesn't lock out anyone else. It doesn't lock out the drug cartel, the human traffickers, or anyone else from trying to come in to this particular area. Early on, when Janet Napolitano became head of the Homeland Security, we received a couple of letters from her. They actually said what the issue was down there on the border with the Border Patrol. She wrote, "One issue affecting the efficacy of the Border Patrol operations within wilderness is prohibitions against mechanical conveyance," that's like four-wheelers, or in the air. "The U.S. Border Patrol regularly depends on these conveyances, the removal of such an advantage being generally detrimental to its ability to accomplish the national security mission." In simple language, if you stop us from going on motorized vehicles into these areas, we can't catch the bad guys. This includes that these types of restrictions can impact the efficacy of operations and be a hindrance to the maintenance of officer safety. It makes their job more difficult and it puts them at risk. For example, she continued, "It may be inadvisable for officer safety to wait for the arrival of horses for pursuit purposes, or to attempt to apprehend smuggling vehicles within the wilderness with a less capable form of transportation." In simple words again, if the idea is of Department of Interior that the Border Patrol, when they come to one of these special areas, have to go on foot, they have to chase them down on foot, or wait till a horse arrives so they can chase them down on horse, while the drug cartel are using motorized vehicles, that flat out does not make sense. But that is indeed what is happening down there. She continued on with a different correspondence. "It illustrates that in areas where the Border Patrol has been given access, the regrowth and rehabilitation of the land has improved. But overall, the removal of cross-border violators, stopping the drug cartel from coming across the border, from public lands is a value to the environment as well as to the mission of the land managers. The validity of this statement was evidenced recently when the vehicle fence project south of the Buenos Aires National Wildlife Refuge received praise from a fish and wildlife biologist. The biologist was encouraged by the regrowth and the rehabilitation taking place naturally to the north of the vehicle fence subsequent to its installation." Now, what she was saying very simply is when you stop the Border Patrol from being able to do their job, they don't do their job, and the bad guys come across. And the bad guys don't care at all about the environment or what the laws are or what the rules are. And if you were able to stop them, then all the degradation that takes place by the drug cartel coming across the border can be fixed, and can be fixed well. Now, I have to admit, that was early on in her administration with the Department of Homeland Security. I have to admit also, of late, the Department of Homeland Security has been told to simply tell us everything is going fine down there on the border. Things are getting better. We are working together nicely. It's not quite the same story I got on the trips down there to the border when I talked to the people. In fact, one of the things that is actually disturbing is our committee staff has been refused access to even talk to Department of Homeland Security personnel ever since we started making this particular kind of push. My assumption is there is a reason that the drug cartels are trying to go through this Arizona sector. The reason relates to the kinds of lands that are down there and how we treat those lands. And the reason simply says if we allow the Border Patrol to do their job, we will all be much more secure. And the concept of stopping the Border Patrol from doing their job on federal property is simply unacceptable. And yet, that is indeed what we are doing right now. To the Department of Interior's response to that, they said the following in a memo, 2008. "Congress has directed construction of these facilities," meaning the public lands, "and there is a compelling national security issue, but these towers and buildings and associated equipment and motorized activities within congressionally designated wilderness would be contrary to protecting the primeval character of wilderness and hence contrary to the intent of Congress." Contrary to the intent of Congress? Do they really want us to believe that Congress wants to have a porous border? That Congress actually welcomes with opening arms the drug cartels coming into this country? That the illegal drugs coming in here that are destroying the lives of our children, we welcome with open arms? That the kind of human degradation, the kind of victim crimes, crimes against humanity, the kinds of rape trees are something Congress really wants to perpetuate? That's really what they want us to say? Further on with this memo, the Department of Homeland Security proposals would not preserve natural conditions. This is once again Interior's memo. Would make the imprint of man's work substantially noticeable, and would substantially reduce opportunities for solitude or a primitive and unconfined type of recreation, and would impair these areas for their future use and enjoyment of the American people as wilderness. The DHS proposals do not fall under the exemptions of the prohibitions for use in Section 4C of the Wilderness Act, and therefore are prohibited. Reduce opportunities for solitude, unconfined type of recreation. Maybe they do have a point. I'd say that the drug cartel operatives armed with AK-47s would pretty much reduce the solitude in a pretty serious way along the border. But unfortunately, that is the approach. That is the attitude. So, what does the Department of Interior propose for this? Rather than allowing the Border Patrol to do their job and trying to control our border, which a sovereign country would naturally do, you put up a sign to tell Americans that travel is not recommended. The goal is to stay away from these particular areas. The approach was simply this. Since the areas of American land on the American border are unsafe, let's do whatever we can to stop Americans from going down there. And in so doing, cede over these areas to the drug cartels. That will be one of the ways of solving the problems. Since that's not a terribly politically correct approach to warn the public of the danger of traveling through American territory, perhaps you can put up a softer and gentler sign, which is a travel caution. Smuggling and illegal immigration may be encountered in this area. Proceed at your own risk. I'm sorry. This may be the approach, but it's the wrong approach. And I wish this were just limited to the Arizona border. Same line was used in the Big Bend National Park and has been used on other federal lands around the border. We simply know it is not safe to go into these areas where criminal activity is taking place, and the problem is no one is doing anything about it. Almost all of the Organ Pipe National Monument was closed to visitors. That's along the Arizona border. Recently, I saw an article in which a portion of Organ Pipe was opened up to visitors. That's wonderful. However, if you went there, you still had to go with an armed guard. There is an article that was written only 8 hours ago talking about the opportunity of people going down there where the park ranger, wearing a bulky, dark green, bulletproof vest, told the tourists last week that they would be going on their travel in a van and a hike. He told them that there would be some law enforcement officers hiding in the hills and closely watching their 2-hour nature hike, while another pair of armed rangers would follow the tourists closely from the ground. They'll all have M14s at hand, he said. Please don't be worried. As the group loaded into the vans, one woman from Idaho whispered to her husband, "Does it make you worried? They got chest protections, and we don't got none of them." Homeland Security is saying that in this park, things are getting better. I think they are. Because finally, they allowed Homeland Security to put up 9 surveillance towers in the park, making it easier for the agents to detect new foot traffic, so that drug runners are no longer simply hiding in the hills, waiting to succeed where the towers cannot contact them. See, that's what we're doing, and that's simply not a viable approach to it. Let me try and tell you this way. Obviously, a fence by itself is not enough to secure the border. We do need electronic tracking devices. This is a picture of one of our mobile tracking devices. It's very high-tech, it's very wonderful, and as you'll notice, it's a truck with a traffic device on it. In the Organ Pipe National Monument, they tried to move this from point A to point B. And the end result was that after 6 months, the land managers finally said, okay, you can move this truck from point A to point B. By that time, it wasn't worth it. It's a truck. Now, if the land manager had studied this issue for 6 months and then said, all right, look, the land is too precious in that part where you want to go, you can't go at all, maybe I could understand that. I wouldn't like it, but I could understand it. But that's not what he said. He said, you're going to wait 6 months, I'll review it for 6 months, and 6 months later he said, okay, go ahead and back up the truck and move it. These devices are essential for us controlling the border, but it is essential that if it is a mobile device, it has to be mobile. It has to have the ability of backing up the truck and moving it to somewhere else. There is another example of the pronghorn antelope that is there, the Sonoran pronghorn antelope in the area. A BLM official wrote in an email to the Department of Homeland Security regarding testing for replacement of equipment that they could do the following. A biological monitor shall be present, a person shall be present at the proposed location of these traffic monitors for the Sonoran pronghorn prior to any disturbance. The monitor must have experience with observing pronghorns. The monitor will scan the area for pronghorn, and if observed, any kind of activity will be delayed until the pronghorn moved of its own volition. The pronghorn cannot be encouraged to vacate an area. And if by any chance the Border Patrol was to run across a group of these, its job was then to back up, not turn around, but to back up no faster than 15 miles an hour until you are out of that particular area. One of the things that we have found out that is taking place down there is basically Department of Interior is insisting on mitigation. I think there's some other words that I would rather use, mitigation funds coming from the Department of Homeland Security. The calculations that we conducted a couple of years ago says that as of that date, $10 million of federal money has gone to the Border Patrol supposedly to protect our border, and then instead been reverted over to the Department of Interior to hire things like the pronghorn monitor or buy other property for other purposes in the name of mitigation of the environmental damage caused by the Border Patrol. Unfortunately, there is no way to mitigate against the environmental damage caused by the drug cartels and the human smugglers coming in here, nor does the Department of Interior seem to care about that. You ready? I'm joined here by a good friend from Arizona who knows this full well. This is where he lives and understands it. He also sits on the committee that talks about these particular areas and has introduced an amendment on the reauthorization bill that comes from his committee. So the representative, Mr. Quayle, I will yield to him what time he needs if he'd like to enter right now, and then I'll pick it up whenever you're done.
That sounds great. I thank the gentleman for yielding. I really want to thank him for his leadership on this issue and for working with me to put in similar provisions within the Homeland Security reauthorization, which we hope will come to the floor in August, because it's a serious issue. As the gentleman from Utah was talking about, is that the amount of destruction, both on the environmental side and just on the human side, from these drug smugglers and human smugglers in very environmentally sensitive areas in the Sonoran Desert, is devastating. And if you think about the amount of carnage that has happened just south of the border, you have over 30,000 people who have been killed by drug cartel violence in the last 5 years. And last year, I was with other members of our Arizona delegation. We were going down to the border and seeing what was going on. And we were at the Douglas Port of Entry. And the night before, they had videos of this, which was about 70 yards from the border, where a fake police cruiser that was disguised by the drug cartels stopped just south of the port of entry, entered into an establishment, unloaded hundreds of rounds of ammunition in there, killing a handful and wounding dozens of people. Now, these are the same type of people who are taking advantage of the weak spots within our border. And if you look at the Arizona border, about 305 miles of federal lands in Arizona, which is about 83% of the 370-mile Arizona-Mexico border, is federal lands. And right now, we do not have the ability, the Border Patrol agents, to actually go onto those federal lands unless they abide by the Memorandum of Understanding, which says they have different definitions of when they can actually go and apprehend somebody. But the fact of the matter is that these drug cartels, these human smuggling operations, they are nimble. They are watching every move that our Border Patrol agents are making. They are noting where the weak spots are, where the surveillance equipment is, And for our Border Patrol agents to actually go and move it to areas where the traffic has increased, they have to go to the Department of Interior to get prior permission. There was a GAO study that said at one point, in some instances, that could take up to 4 months. 4 months for our Border Patrol agents to actually move a piece of surveillance equipment or to move motorized vehicles onto various areas of federal lands. Now, I understand the need to protect the delicate Sonoran Desert, but it is getting decimated, absolutely decimated by these human traffickers and drug traffickers who do not care about it. I personally believe that our Border Patrol agents and custom officials will take a much better job in actually being sensitive to these areas while trying to actually protect the citizens of this country from the violence that's going to be streaming across the border. This is such a big and serious issue that not that many people know about, and Mr. Bishop from Utah has really taken the lead on this, and I commend him for it. And I look forward to working with you on these issues going forward, because we need to get a handle of our border and the violence that's going to spill over. And in order to do that, we have to allow our agents the ability to have the unfettered access onto our federal lands so they can actually do their job and protect the border. So, Mr. Bishop, I thank you very much, and I yield back.
I thank you for that, and I appreciate you joining me here because, once again, you live in that state. Your constituents know the fear that is taking place around Americans who live on that particular border, the danger that is down there. And once again, this is not just an issue that will go away if the economy goes sour. These are the drug cartels. These are the human traffickers. These are the worst kinds of people, and we don't want them here. And as a country, if we're going to be a sovereign country, we have to control the border. If for no other reason, we have to be able to control the border. Whether the total number coming across is getting less or is increasing, we don't have definite figures yet. Doesn't matter. As long as one drug cartel is still coming across the border with illegal drugs, that's one too many, and we have to do something about it. So I appreciate very much, and I realize you have another obligation to go to. Thank you for coming down, and you're welcome to stay if you'd like to. But he also added, a premise into where we're going, because what is taking place, quite frankly, is the violence that is taking place on the Arizona border. We all know about Fast and Furious and what a silly idea this was, how ludicrous of a program to arm the drug cartel, and that find out that those arms that they were given by the federal government is coming back to harm us. But along the border, we have had a specific row of people who have been not just harassed by the drug cartel, but have been killed by the drug cartel. Starting in 2002, Park Ranger Chris Eagle, who was shot and killed in the line of duty while pursuing a member of the Mexican drug cartel that had crossed the United States border into Organ Pipe National Monument, which is off limits to Americans. 2008, Border Patrol agent Luis Aguilar, who was killed in the line of duty after being hit by a vehicle that had crossed illegally into the United States through the Imperial Sand Dunes, which is BLM ground where the Border Patrol has restrictions. What hurts me as well is Rob Krentz, a rancher, multi-generational rancher, on his own property in Arizona. See, Rob Krentz over there was actually out patrolling going through his property. He had just had a hip replacement, was ready to have a knee replacement, or vice versa. He was on an ATV vehicle with his dog. He came across a group of illegals who were there. Part of the cartel, again, is the assumption. And usually what happens is there's flight, but in this case, there was no flight, and he was not physically able to fly, and so what happened is both he and his dog was shot. The one we assume that did the shooting came across that wildlife refuge where the gate was locked to prohibit the Border Patrol from going in there and doing their job. And when we assume his exit back into Mexico was a circuitous route that went back out of his way so he could go back through that same area that was off limits to the Border Patrol from totally doing their job. He lost his life because of our policies that don't make sense. December 10th, 2010, Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was shot and killed, once again on Forest Service land, with guns that were obtained through the Fast and Furious program. One of the other committees of our Congress has on their website the statement that a now sealed federal grand jury indictment in the death of the Border Patrol agent Terry says the cartel operatives were patrolling this rugged desert area with the intent of intentionally and forcibly assault on Border Patrol agents. And it happened because we are not taking control of our border. Look, as sad as that is, this is still another look at the border. It's a unique look at the border because you can see the fence is still running along and the one road along the fence is still running along. Unfortunately, there's a gap in the fence. That gap is an endangered species habitat right-of-way, so the species can go from one side of the border to the other. Unfortunately, I will tell you that it's not just an endangered species that goes from one side of the border to the other. That is endemic of the situation we have down there where our border policies, our land policies, take precedence over border security. And that is simply what we ought not or should not be doing. Our solution is, I think, very simple. It's House Bill 1505, the National Security and Federal Lands Protection Act. The simple answer of what this bill does is simply it allows the Federal Border Patrol to do on federal property what it already can do on private property. It says our number one priority should be controlling our borders, to stopping the drugs and the violence that is taking place in Arizona. This bill protects legal use of the land, such as mining and hunting and camping and fishing, in an effort to try and make sure that we can protect American property for American use, not for drug cartel use. There were simpler versions of this that simply said, oh, well, you can't stop the Border Patrol from doing what they need to do to meet their needs. Unfortunately, some of the administration in these departments laughed at us and said, that's not going to work. You can't tell us what won't happen. So we wrote the bill to be proactive and tell what the Border Patrol can do. It also had to put in there specific, and this is once again from the Department of Interior insisting it, we put down the specific environmental laws that can be abridged only for the purpose of protecting the border. It is the same list that was done about 5 years ago when the Department of Interior insisted that we had, as Congress, we had to list down specific environmental laws that could be broached in order to complete some of the fencing along our southern border. Same rules, same laws, same element. So the Border Patrol can do their job. That's what it simply does. You know, there was one group that was opposed to it because they said, you know, the Border Patrol is found 15 to 20 miles north of the border. Yeah, their jurisdiction is up to 100 miles north of the border. They also said that surveillance data shows that there are nearly 8,000 miles, some estimate of 20,000 miles, of illegal wildcat roads cutting through some of this border area. I want you to know, it is not the Border Patrol, even though this group tried to blame the Border Patrol for these 20,000, if indeed it's that high, miles of illegal roads. They're not the ones creating that. It is the drug cartels that are cutting roads through our habitat, through wilderness areas, so that they can use them for their drug smuggling activities. If you go down there, you can simply see on the ground where these trails are. If you fly above it, you can see where they are. If you go up to the high points, you can see where their nests are. So you can see very clearly and very easily where they have their lookout spots. Actually, I went to one of those. It was just over the border into Mexico. I was actually unimpressed because I found out that amongst the things that they were leaving in the trash behind is they drank only Diet Coke. If they'd done Dr. Pepper, I would have been impressed by their taste, but it was only Diet Coke. I have also heard all sorts of rumors about what we are trying to do with this bill, trying to make sure that this border is secure so Americans can go back into American property and be secure. I have heard rumors that we are trying to limit public access. That's not true. What we are trying to do is make public access safe. That's the job of the government, is to make our borders secure. I have been told that this is a simple land grab. We are trying, some groups out there who simply don't understand what's going on try to label this as a giant land grab. I don't know how you can call it a land grab when the federal government is simply trying to allow the Border Patrol to do its job on federal land. We're not expending any more power or opportunity to the Border Patrol. We're simply saying federal land should not stop them from doing their job. There are some that will simply say, well, if we ignore this, it will simply go away. This problem is not going to go away. It is too deep. It is too severe to simply go away. There was one last reason why this approach is extremely important. As I said at the very beginning, almost every town hall meeting I have, and I'm saying this in conclusion, as I said in the beginning, almost every town hall meeting that I have, they talk about immigration. Immigration issues are complex. Sometimes they're going to be complicated and will require compromise and consideration. And right now out there, there's a great deal of anger and anxiety in a lot of people simply because we are not controlling our borders and American lands are not safe and there is too much violence taking place. And it's simply wrong to prohibit our Border Patrol in favor of allowing the drug cartels and those doing human trafficking to have free access into this country. If indeed we are serious about long-term immigration, the first thing you have to do is reduce the anger and reduce the anxiety level. And the first way to do that is be able to look at the American people and with a clear conscience and in truth, look them in the eye and say, our borders are secure. We control who comes into this country and who does not come into this country because that is what a sovereign nation does. Our hope is that we can pass this bill and take the first step to controlling the border, which is simply to allow the Border Patrol access to where the Border Patrol needs to be, to give them the same opportunity on public lands that they have on private lands. Because it is very clear, Border Patrol knows what they are doing. They are doing a good job. Where they are allowed the freedom and flexibility to do their jobs, the issue of illegal immigration and legal entry into this country of all kinds, but especially illegal entry in this country by the bad guys who are trying to put illegal drugs and other kinds of crimes and bringing them into this country, where they are allowed to do their job, they are successful. What we have to do is now look on federal property where the federal rules prohibit the Border Patrol from doing their property and change that. Simply allow them to do their job. House Bill 1505 does that. And until we do that, we will never move forward into a larger solution to our immigration problem, and we will continue to have illegal drugs and other kinds of crimes against humanity taking place on American soil, and it will not stop. That's why this bill is so important. And with that, Mr. Speaker, with gratitude for allowing me this moment to go through this particular issue, I will yield back the remainder of my time.